Good morning. My name is Eli Howes. Can you please tell me your full name?
Oh, gladly. My name is Roy Fude.
And what shall I call you?
Oh, just Roy.
This is Roy. He's from Lebanon and has achieved the best IELTS score I've ever seen. Check this out. Listening, band 9. Reading, 9. Writing, 9. And speaking, 9 as well. He's the first person that I've ever seen get band 9 in the IELTS writing test, and I've certainly not heard of anyone getting straight 9s in all parts of the test. Crazy. By the way, stick around until the end because after our mock speaking test, I'll be asking him how he got band 9 in IELTS writing. Spoiler alert, he wrote almost 700 words for his Task 2 essay. Okay, let's watch Roy.
Okay, Roy, in this first part, I'd like to ask you some questions about yourself. Let's talk about what you do. Do you work or are you a student?
No, I'm afraid my student days are behind me. I'm a teacher. I teach the SAT and the IELTS exams, and I'm currently working full time.
Right, it's easy to see from the start that Roy has got an exceptionally high level of English. I asked Roy, do you work or study? By the way, that's the most common question in the IELTS test. He answered, I'm afraid my student days are behind me. This is a brilliant phrase. It means he used to be a student, but not anymore. His time as a student has passed. Let's break it down. We often use I'm afraid when we want to show regret for something. So, for example, if someone wants your help and you can't help them, you might say, I'm afraid I can't help you. Or if someone invites you to a party, you might say, I'm afraid I can't come to your party. Now, Roy says, I'm afraid my student days are behind me. If something is behind you, it means that those times have passed. So someone who has retired might say, my days of waking up at 6 a.m. to get to work are behind me. By the way, this is a C2 level idiom, so that's band 8/9 vocabulary. Okay, you're about to listen to why Roy chose his job. See if you can answer this question. Which subjects did Roy do well in at school? Listen to find out.
And why did you choose this type of job?
Well, you know what they say, you don't choose the force or whatever it is, the force chooses you.
Hmm.
Interestingly, I was looking at my old report cards, and it says Roy is doing well academically, especially English and history. And those ended up being my degrees. So it was just my strengths, they just guided me towards this profession.
Okay, so which subjects did Roy do well in at school? The answer is English and history. Listen again.
Interestingly, I was looking at my old report cards, and it says Roy is doing well academically, especially English and history.
Now, I also asked Roy, why did you choose this type of job? This is a very common question in part 1. You might get asked, why did you choose this type of job? Or if you're a student, you'll be asked, why did you choose this subject? The problem is, it can be very difficult to answer this question on the spot. So have a think about how you would answer this question before you go to do your IELTS test. Here's some vocabulary to help you. I always wanted to be a... For example, I always wanted to be a lawyer ever since I was a child. Or you could say, I wanted to follow in my parents' footsteps. I wanted to follow in my parents' footsteps means you've chosen the same profession as your parents. So you could say, I wanted to follow in my mother's footsteps and become a doctor. You could also have an answer like Roy. You could say something like, well, I was always good at English, so it seemed natural that I would become a teacher. Okay, for this next part, answer the question, why does Roy miss being a student? Have a watch to find out.
And do you miss being a student?
Yes, I do. Some of my happiest days were as a university student. I definitely miss those. I miss feeding off the energy of the professor, the students, all of it.
Roy says he misses feeding off the energy of the professor and the students. To feed off something means to gain strength, energy, or support from something. So you can say, the singer fed off the crowd's enthusiasm and applause. Now, here's the next question. Would Roy like to become a student again? Watch to find out.
Do you think you'll ever return to be a student and study something new?
I think so. I think so. Currently, I'm considering expanding my, honing my skills and expanding my current knowledge base. So perhaps taking a CELTA is, it's on the horizon. I'm thinking about it. Yeah.
So, would Roy like to be a student again? Yes, Roy would like to be a student again. He said he would like to do a CELTA, which is a language teaching certificate. Do you remember what he said? He said, doing a CELTA is on the horizon. So the horizon is this part here. It's the line at the furthest place that you can see. Now, imagine if you were on a boat and you saw land on the horizon. It would mean that land was coming. So on the horizon means likely to happen in the future. You can say something like, my IELTS test is on the horizon, so I need to work diligently. Now, for this next part, answer the question, which languages does Roy speak?
Let's move on. Let's talk about languages. What languages do you speak?
I speak English and Arabic, and I also speak a bit of French. My French is intermediate at best.
Okay, Roy speaks English, Arabic, and a bit of French. Okay, next question. Which languages were taught at Roy's school?
Have you ever learned any foreign languages at school?
No, not really. Apart from these, no.
Well, why not?
Good question. I don't think the schools I went to, I don't remember if they were even offered. It's not like I could have taken a Spanish class or an Italian class or whatever, and it was, was my choice. It wasn't. I think it was just the curriculum was just not designed for that.
Right, that was a trick question. He wasn't taught any languages at school. He said, I don't know if they were even offered. Do you see the part were offered? This is an example of the passive form. You take the verb to be and then add the past participle. It means that you don't need to say the subject of the sentence. So instead of my school didn't offer language classes, you can say language classes weren't offered. Instead of saying my parents didn't buy me presents, you can say I wasn't bought presents. Okay, now when you watch the next part, answer this question. Is it harder for children or adults to learn a foreign language? Let's see what Roy has got to say.
Do you think it's difficult to learn a new language?
Oh yeah, definitely. Regardless of who you are, but especially if you're an adult, it's especially challenging. I think physiologically it's challenging, right? As your mind is, your brain actually is no longer growing. So it's very hard to assimilate all that new knowledge, even if you have time and no stress. But let's be honest here. Which adult does not have, a lot of time and no stress? So add all of those together, right? Little time, life stress, and physiological changes, right? And there's, in my mind, there's no doubt it's an uphill battle for sure.
Okay, Roy thinks it's harder for adults to learn English because of physiological factors, that adults' brains aren't growing, and also because they have less time and more stress. Now, because of all of these factors, Roy describes learning a new language as an uphill battle. If something is an uphill battle, it is very difficult and a complete struggle. So you could say starting her own business was proving to be an uphill battle. Or preparing for the IELTS test alone is an uphill battle. By the way, if you want some help with your IELTS test, check out all of my IELTS courses. I have 8 different IELTS courses, loads of model essays, and a ton of PDFs to help you get your desired score. Members of English Pro Tips have been able to achieve way beyond their desired band score and are now working in countries like Canada, Australia, and the UK. You can start for free at englishprotips.com. Anyway, on with the lesson. In the next part, find out why doesn't Roy want to learn a new language?
And would you like to learn any new languages in the future?
No. It's not
Why
something
not?
I mean, 3 languages under my belt, I feel is enough. I already speak the world's, for better or worse, the world's lingua franca, which is English, obviously. So for me, I can read almost any book. I can research online. I can go to any website. I can watch any movie, play any video game, communicate with almost anyone using this language. For me, again, for better or worse, there's no incentive for me to, go out of my way and learn a new language.
Roy said he doesn't want to learn any new languages because he already has 3 languages under his belt, which means he has already learned 3 languages. If something is under your belt, then you have already achieved, learned, or obtained something. So, for example, you could say, basic computer skills are a good thing to have under your belt, meaning it's a good thing to learn basic computer skills. By the way, that's also C2 level vocabulary, so band 8/9. Now, Roy also mentions that he already speaks the world's lingua franca. Lingua franca describes a language used for communication between groups. So, for example, if there is a Spanish person that speaks Spanish and English, and an Indian person who speaks Hindi and English, then they will have to communicate in English. It's their shared language that they both speak. This shared language is called a lingua franca. Roy says, I already speak the world's lingua franca, which is English, obviously. Okay, so for the next part, try to answer this question. Which classes did Roy find easy to stay focused in?
Let's move on. Let's talk about concentration. When you were a child, could you stay focused in class at school?
Well, the short answer to that is it depends, right? Or let's say it depended. Some teachers were great. Some teachers sucked. And there were some, some subjects I absolutely loved. Like, as I've mentioned, before, English and history, I have always been, near and dear to my heart. Math, physics, chemistry, regardless of the teacher, you can bribe me with 20 lollipops to stay focused in those, right? I was just lost. I mean, I don't care how Pythagoras has proved that 2 isosceles triangles are the same. Just get a damn protractor and put it there, and you'll know if the angles are equal or not. Just leave me alone, So yeah, the short answer is, again, it just depended.
So Roy found it easy to stay focused in English and history classes. He says, English and history have always been near and dear to my heart. Now, if something is near and dear to your heart, it means that it's very personally and emotionally important. So you could say, music has always been near and dear to my heart, or my children's paintings are near and dear to my heart. Now, when it came to math, physics, and chemistry, Roy says, you couldn't bribe me with 20 lollipops to stay focused in those classes. So even if you gave Roy, well, when he was a child that is, even if you gave him 20 lollipops, he wouldn't stay focused in those classes. He just didn't like them. Now, for the next part, answer this question. What does Roy do to stop himself from getting distracted by his phone?
And what do you do nowadays to help you concentrate?
That's a good question. What do I do now to help me concentrate? Mostly remove distractions. So if I have something serious, I put my phones on silent and put them out of arm's reach. Doesn't have to be in the next room or something, but just so I can grab them easily and quickly. So that's basically it. Otherwise, if I really have something I need to do, just another thing I suppose is leaving it till the very end. I'm not encouraging procrastination here, but by procrastinating and having a deadline loom over you, that alone is motivation enough.
Roy said, I put my phones on silent and put them out of arm's reach. Now, if something is within arm's reach, it means that you can easily reach it without moving too much. So if it's out of arm's reach, it means it can't be easily reached. So for example, when my baby niece comes to visit, I make sure that all the sharp items in the apartment are out of arm's reach. Okay, for the next question, answer this. What kinds of tasks does Roy prioritize? Let's have a look.
And when is it that you find that you need to be focused?
Urgent things, right? Unfortunately, I'm not going to claim I have the discipline to focus on things that are important but not urgent, right? So urgent and important or urgent usually get the lion's share of the focus.
Roy says urgent and important or urgent tasks usually get the lion's share of the focus. Have you heard this idiom before? To have or to get the lion's share? It means to have the largest part or most of something. For example, you could say, I spend the lion's share of my salary on traveling, which means that traveling is your biggest expense. Or, I spend the lion's share of my time with my children, which means that you spend most of your time with your kids. We'll now listen to Roy's part 2. In this part, you have to speak about a topic for 2 minutes. Now, Roy will be talking about a book that he read recently. Listen carefully and find out, why would some people be discouraged from reading this book?
All right, we're going to move on to part 2, and in this part I'm going to give you a topic and I'd like you to talk about it for 1 to 2 minutes. Before you talk, you'll have 1 minute to think about what you're going to say, and you can make some notes if you wish. Do you understand?
Yes.
All right, remember you have 1 to 2 minutes for this, so don't worry if I stop you. I'll tell you when the time is up. Can you start speaking now, please?
Yes. So the book I recently read is called, fittingly, How to Read a Book. And it was about the title is pretty self-explanatory, okay? Who wrote the book? It was a philosopher named Mortimer J. Adler. He's an American philosopher, and he was the editor of the famous Britannica encyclopedia in the 50s and 60s, I believe. So the book is divided into 4 parts, right? The basic part, the second part is how to scan, sort of get an idea of the book before you actually delve into it. The third part is how to analyze the book, and the fourth part is about going beyond the book and comparing 2 books, right? So these 2 authors spoke about the same topic. Where do they differ? Where do they agree? Where do you come in? That's like the ultimate, the ultimate reading method. Why do I want to read it a second time? I want to read it a second time because it's a pretty dense book, right? It's not one of those books you read once, you put away, right? You have to read it, you have to chew it, you have to, regurgitate it, you have to summarize it, you have to think first, make sure that, the bedrock is there. And then, and most importantly, you actually have to put it in practice. It's not one of those books that you read, go, okay, yeah, I get it. Okay. No, you have to actually, get those 2 books and try that exercise, right? See, okay, what do I think? Where do they agree? Where do they disagree? And go on this wonderful intellectual journey. It's a difficult book. It was written first in 1940, then revised in 1972. So it was written in very formal English, which put a lot of people off, unfortunately. But otherwise, it's a good. Yes.
Thank you.
Well, that was a very impressive part 2. Did you see that Roy just kept on talking until I asked him to stop? That's a great thing to do. In part 2, you don't have a clock or anything, so you should just keep on speaking until the examiner asks you to stop. Now, did you hear why Roy thinks that some people would be discouraged from reading this book? It was quite tricky. He said, "It was written in very formal English, which put a lot of people off." So the language in the book is very formal and potentially difficult to read. Now, the phrasal verb put off is very useful. It means to discourage someone from doing something. So you could say, "I wanted to do the IELTS test, but I was put off by the price." Or, "I wanted to study in Scotland, but I'm put off by the weather." By the way, it rains a lot here in Scotland. Now, at the end of part 2, the examiner might ask you a follow-up question. This will be a simple question with a yes or no answer. If the examiner asks you one of these questions in your IELTS test, just give a short answer. Now, I asked Roy whether he would recommend this book. Listen and find out who Roy has recommended the book to.
Have you recommended this book to other people?
I've recommended it to anyone who would listen. Yeah.
Okay, so Roy would recommend this book to anyone who would listen. So basically anyone. We're now going to move on to part 3. In this part, the examiner will ask you questions about your opinions on topics related to, well, whatever your topic was in part 2. Listen to this part and answer the question, why are humans the dominant species and not lions? This is a tricky question, so listen carefully to what Roy has got to say. Good luck.
So we've been talking about a book that you would like to read for a second time, and I'd like to discuss with you several more questions related to this. Let's consider, first of all, children and reading. Do you think that we should encourage children to read?
Oh, absolutely. I think we should encourage children to do anything that gets them off of those damn screens. But, definitely. I mean, reading for me is it's for me, it's what makes us humans, right? It's what makes us human, period. We got to where we were because we can build on previous knowledge, right? A lion who gets shot by a hunter cannot teach the next generation of lions to hide in the grass and not attack someone with a rifle, right? And that's why they're not in control of the planet, for better or worse, right? But we are in control because we can build this knowledge and get our imagination running, right? And have conversations with long dead people, one-sided conversations, but conversations nonetheless.
Alright, this was a tricky question. Why are humans the dominant species and not lions? Well, Roy said, we got to where we were because we can build on previous knowledge. So, because we can learn from the past through books, for example, we're able to make better decisions in the present, and that's what makes us the dominant species. Roy used the example of how a lion can't teach other lions not to attack someone with a rifle, and that's why they can't make the same, or rather that's why they can make the same mistake again and again. Right, for the next part, answer this question. Why is reading better than other modes of communication for spreading information? Another tricky question. Good luck.
So
But
by
also,
not
there are other ways to give that information, for example, through spoken word or visually through things like documentaries. What makes books so important in this regard?
True. I would not disagree with that, right? I would not disagree with that. And as we know, most of our information giving, right, for lack of a better term, was done orally, right? I mean, writing is it's like 7,000-year-old invention, right?
Mm.
So definitely nothing against the spoken word, right? Definitely nothing against the visual word, not visual word, the visual representation of knowledge, right? Via theater or plays or YouTube videos or documentaries or any of that. Nothing against that. Why reading specifically? I would say because you are in control of the pace, right? If someone is speaking, you're under their mercy, for lack of a better term, right? When you're watching a documentary, you can pause, right, and fast forward and all that, but it's different. When you have a book, you're in control of the pace. So If something is easy or you've seen it before, they're talking about an experiment, right? That you've seen before, you can read it quickly. Then they talk about something new, you can go back to reading it slowly. You can take notes, right? Right on the page. You can look up vocab words that you don't know, right? You don't have that option, those options when
Mm.
you're watching a video.
Okay, so Roy thinks that reading is especially good for spreading information because with reading you are in control of the pace. So pace means the speed. As Roy mentions, you can always stop reading to analyze information or reread sections of a book again and again. So that's why Roy thinks books are especially useful. Now for the next part, answer this question. Why is it important to read to children?
So, but if the primary reason for books to be read is though so we can gather and digest new information, why is it important to read to children? Because a lot of children's books don't necessarily have knowledge to be digested, or perhaps they do.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it depends on the book. For me, there is usually always a lesson somewhere, right?
Mm.
At least the books I was reading, or yeah, nobody used to read to me, but I started reading from an early age. There was always a moral, right, somewhere hidden. And for children, I think forget about the lessons per se. Um, for me, it's about building the habit, right? If you read to them at night, they will associate reading with love, care, you name it, right? So it's about that habit building. And again, in the case of children, just by learning new words, even if there's no, moral or lesson behind them, because they're young, any new word for them is a plus.
So why is it important to read to children? Well, Roy says if you read to them at night, they will associate reading with love and care. So children will connect love and care with reading if their parents read to them at night. By the way, this is an example of the first conditional. If plus the present simple, and then will, and then the infinitive. We use it when we're communicating future consequences. So, for example, you could say, if you watch this video, you will learn some useful vocabulary. Or, if you stop watching now, you won't learn how Roy got band 9 in IELTS writing. By the way, that's coming up after the mock test. For this next part, try to answer this question. Who banned books in medieval times?
And let's move on. Let's talk a bit about the power of books. Now, some people consider certain books throughout history, or even nowadays, to be considered dangerous. Why do you think that is?
I think that is because of the people in power. This is what it comes down to, as far as I'm concerned, right? The only reason, so always institutions in power. And why would they ban books? Because it goes against their interests, their vested interests, right? Either they speak against authority, or they teach you, I don't know, how to be, how to live off grid or something, right? All of these don't help the people in power, right?
So, who banned books in medieval times? Roy said, the church. Listen again.
Well, who bans books, right? People in power. In medieval time, it was the church, right? Modern times, it's governments.
Okay, that was a tricky one to get right, as Roy speaks at a fast pace. For the final question, answer this. Does Roy think books should be banned?
So
do you
yeah,
do you think it's right that books should be banned?
absolutely not.
Right.
Absolutely not. Right. An idea should be free to run wild and be explored, right? No one should be, I mean, unless the idea is, related to something almost every sane non-sociopathic person agrees is wrong, right? Such as murder, okay? Or how to create a bomb or something like that, right? Something that damages. But I don't mean something like that. I mean an idea, right? Idea for a different political system or a different economic system, right? or a different way of, dealing with the resources we have or the environment, I think all of these should be given free rein until proven wrong. But it shouldn't be decided by some, pencil pusher somewhere, right? Living in a secluded ivory tower, right? Who, whose best interest it is that they stay in power, i.e., the people who usually make those decisions. I don't think it should be left to them.
Wow, what an IELTS test. So no, Roy doesn't think books should be banned. Now this was an incredibly impressive IELTS test. I can totally see why Roy got band 9 in his real test. Now, Roy didn't just get band 9 in IELTS speaking, he got 9 in writing, reading, and listening as well. If you're interested in hearing his tips for the different parts of the test, keep watching. Roy has got a lot of great ideas that he'd like to share with you.
All right, thank you very much. That is the end of the speaking test.
Thank you.
Right, wonderful. So Roy, yeah, obviously a very, very strong band 9. Incredible that you've got band 9 in speaking before, band 9 in reading, band 9 in listening, and band 9 in writing as well. What was your experience doing this speaking test, and how did it compare to your real IELTS speaking test?
Well, I can say you're truly a wonderful human being. Your energy is so positive. I mean, it's hard to say in isolation. I mean, if I had you as an actual examiner, would I have been a bit more nervous?
Right.
I don't know. I don't know. It's a hypothetical thing. I think a bit, not because of you, but because of the, more is at stake, right?
Mm.
But overall, again, I've done these so many times. I mean, I've done them 4 times officially,
Yeah.
and I've done them, as mock setups with students. That no, you know, I felt
Yeah.
pretty comfortable.
So you've got band 9 in IELTS speaking before. When you're doing a test like our mock test just there, what kind of things are you thinking about or being conscious of in order to get those high scores?
I try as much as I can to form complex sentences, right? I.e., by adding something like "however" or "that having been said" or "despite," right? Though I think those are what the examiners are looking for, at least partially. And the other thing is try to use a mix of vocab, right? So leaning more toward the formal, the academic, but also getting in something that shows that um, you're fine with colloquialism as well. Like I used the word "damn," for instance, right? When we were doing the speaking test. I mean, ultimately, what is this test meant to gauge, right? It's not your intelligence. It's not your right. It's if you were put in a normal English setting,
Mm.
how well would you do, right? What is the extent that you can communicate? Ultimately, in my mind, this is what a band 9, 8, 7, 6, whatever shows, right? So for me, at least, to show the examiner that I have that range, that it's not only academic stuff I can talk about. I try to use, a wide range of vocab, going from colloquial to formal as much as I can.
Yeah, I think you do that very naturally and appropriately. So, for example, I would say that your register became more academic and more formal as the exam went on. And that's because in part 1, you're being asked personal questions and about your experiences. So, if you were to answer too academically, it would kind of strike me as a little bit odd. However,
Okay.
in part 3 of the exam, we're talking about more abstract notions like should books be banned? If you were to answer in a very colloquial, friendly term about such a serious matter, it would also seem odd. So the examiner is going to kind of guide you and test your ability to talk within those spheres by through the questions that they ask you, whether it's personal part 1 questions or more abstract part 3 questions. And then of course the kind of storytelling ability in part 2, which you did very well. Did you find it hard to talk for 2 minutes in part 2, or do you have any techniques or tips that allow you to really expand on your story and answer?
I personally no. I didn't find it hard. In fact, there was one thing I neglected to mention, which is how did you come across the book, which I didn't have time to go over. Um, so no, for me, it's not a challenge. For me, it's not a challenge. As what happened with us was exactly what happened during my last speaking test. which is that the examiner had to shut me up at some point. He had to tell me that's enough. Your 2 minutes are up.
You know
So I
what?
have no
Yeah,
problem.
that's a good thing, because what
Okay.
the examiner wants to write down when they're evaluating you is that you can speak at length. Like, you could just keep going. You could talk for 2 hours if you wanted to. And then so the examiner can say, can speak with ease at length. And I know that because they were still talking, I had to shut them up. So
Right.
that's a great position to be in. So I often tell my students, in part two, just keep on talking, and then eventually the examiner is going to put their hand out and say, thank you very much, and they're going to ask a follow-up question.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'd like to also just talk about the fact that you said you didn't complete all of the bullet points in your
Mm.
part two topic, because sometimes students ask, do you have to answer the bullet points? Now, what you did is you did it naturally. You didn't ignore a bullet point. You were going to get onto it, but you didn't have time. So that shows that you were on topic, but that you didn't get through. You didn't have enough time to go through all the bullet points. That's great. That's totally
Okay.
fine. The
That's good.
alternative, which is what I think some students try to do, is they ignore a bullet point, or they slightly change the topic in order to fit with something they feel more comfortable speaking about. When they do that, the examiner, if they realize that, is going to be lowering their score, because that shows an inability to talk about unfamiliar topics.
Right.
So there's a difference between what you did, which is, I just didn't have enough time to talk about the bullet point, and there's what some students do, which is, I can't talk about that bullet point, I'm going to change my answer. So what you did, great. What other students sometimes do, not so great.
Right. Right. No, thanks for the tip. These are nuggets to grab onto and then remember.
Yeah. And in part three, I asked you a lot of very difficult abstract questions. Oh, in my mind, they were difficult. When you started answering them, you made them seem almost as though they were very simple concepts, like the
Right.
idea of banning books and who's in power and what does
Right.
reading mean and can it be replaced with other mediums. How do you feel, and what tips would you give for answering those kind of abstract questions?
Sure. I was lucky because, again, yeah, remember, I'm a teacher as well. So you chose something that's up my alley, right? Be it reading in part two, and then you built on that, right? And these are things I have already thought about, right? And these were things that had already pissed me off, right? Before, right? So I wanted to buy *Sapiens*, which is Harari's new book, the big hit, right? *Sapiens*, and the story of our evolutionary story, basically, in a book. And it was banned in Lebanon. I'm like, guys, really? We're still banning the theory of evolution here? I mean, give me a break, guys. Give me a break, okay? And
Yeah.
so I remember. So it was still, poignant in my mind. So I would say I was lucky. Now, what I would tips I would give, and this is what I usually tell my students is, first of all, what I tell them is try to speak for 45 seconds, right? Try to aim for 45 seconds for part three, right? Your answer needs to be fleshed out, okay? You can stick to one point of view, but if you can try to give the other point of view, it will, it will show the examiner that you're not, maybe not narrow. I mean, at the end of the day, the examiner is not assessing you on whether you're narrow-minded or not, right? It's a linguistic assessment. But if you can show both points of view, right, you will have shown that um, you haven't just memorized answers, perhaps, right, or you're just regurgitating something that you've heard, but you're actually coming up with stuff on the spot. And I think that that would get you more points. Whether that's right or not,
Yeah.
please, you can tell
Yeah,
us.
I totally agree. I think when a student does that, and it's what you did, they're showing higher order thinking skills, and they're showing critical thinking skills as well, because they're saying, well, there's this opinion, however, some people disagree. And the interesting thing is, when people and students do that, they're also actually going to use a lot of interesting discourse markers. So they're going to say, however, on the other hand, or despite this argument being, use the word poignant, there are others that believe this. And so they're going to win on all fronts. They're going to show higher order thinking skills, like critical thinking skills, and they're also going to use a wider range of discourse markers and grammatical structures in order to convey their opinions and opinions of others. And sometimes I suggest students that they use what's called an REE method, which is they respond to the question, so maybe a short response. And then,
Okay.
so that's the R. Then E is elaborate, where they explain their idea a bit more. And then the final E is example, where they give an example of what they're talking about. And you did that. And especially when we were just talking, how you were talking about why you think books should not be banned.
Right.
You gave a short answer to that. You elaborated on why, and then you gave the example of *Sapiens* being banned in Lebanon. So
Right.
great. That shows a very developed, full answer, which can help you get a high score. Now, you got a band 9 in IELTS writing as well. You
Oh,
were actually the first person I've ever met that's got
okay.
band 9 in IELTS writing. So I've got a lot of questions for you. And the first
Okay.
question is, how long was your task 2 essay?
My task 2 essay was 696 words.
Wow. So
Yeah.
bearing in mind it says write more than 250 words. So
Yes.
you wrote almost 3 times that.
Yeah, I took that with a grain of salt, right? You can, yeah, minimum is 250. You can write more if you wish to. Yeah, I definitely took that with a grain of salt. Yeah.
You're right to do that. Sometimes I
Yeah.
see teachers telling their students to only go 10% above, but I think they're inventing that myth because you're a perfect example. You got band 9 in IELTS writing, and you wrote. Did you say 690 words?
96. I
So
remember. Yeah.
690, so
696.
almost 700 words.
Right. Right.
And tell me a bit about what was in that essay. Was it lots of ideas, or were you trying to really develop your ideas, or was it a huge introduction or a huge conclusion? How did you structure your essay?
Okay, I'm gonna do my best here to remember. Okay. I'm gonna do here my best to remember because it was almost 2 years ago. I did that in January of 2022. So it's been a year and a half. Okay. What I remember was, and yeah, and here, okay, so I'm gonna go into a bit of teacher mode here, as well as my own experience. So this is what I did, and this is what I teach. Don't write the introduction first. Obviously, it comes first, right? And that's another reason why I encourage students to take the computer-based exam, not the paper-based exam. Okay, so take the computer one, especially if writing is a struggle, and for most people it is, right? And then don't write your introduction first. Write your body paragraphs first, because you may change your thesis, right? You may change your thesis as you're writing, as new ideas come up. Also, your introduction needs to mention what you're going to talk about in order, isn't it? So let's say you start with, okay, whatever, I'm going to talk about the social aspect, then the economic aspect, then the political aspect. But as you get to the political aspect, you realize, whoa, 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 wait, wait, wait. I need to start with the political because the economic and the social stem from the political, right? So make sure everything's in order, right? Make sure your body paragraphs are organized, fleshed out. You have all the ideas, because sometimes when you write, new ideas pop up, right? So yeah, so this is my first piece of advice, and this is what I did. So I wrote and wrote and wrote, and then I wrote the introduction, and then finally you write the conclusion. Um,
I'm
now,
just going to
yeah,
point out, I love that you're dividing your essay logically by, you said the economical, the social, the political. Examiners love that
right,
because not only are your essays well organized, but the general structure of your essay is organized as well. You're saying, well, here's an argument that falls within the political sphere. Here's an argument that falls within the economic sphere. And you can also introduce those arguments in that way. So you can say something like, from an economic perspective, from a social, political point of view. And those phrases are just like gold mines for examiners.
exactly. They give you a thread to follow, right? You know what you're looking at, right? What lens to put on. Absolutely, absolutely. What else? My second piece, yeah, my second piece of advice is, and this is all I really remember from the essay, which is don't be redundant, right? Don't be superfluous. Don't repeat what you've already said, just to flesh it out. So I can say that what I wrote was all new material. So I was either supporting a thesis, right, or an argument or whatever it was, or writing new information, new examples, but I never repeated the same thing to get to that word count. And I think that's very important, right? If you're just repeating in different words, that doesn't really help. My third tip would be, if you try to convince, obviously it depends on the type of essay you get, right? If it's advantages, disadvantages, fine. But usually you're trying to make an argument. If you try to convince, if you try to argue for both sides, you'll end up convincing no one. So try to, have the confidence to stick to your guns, so to speak, right? That having been said, don't be afraid to have a counter argument and flesh out the counter argument. I think the essay I got, that's what I did, right? I put the counter, I think it was, do you think public libraries are still useful? Should they be shut down? Why or why not? Something like that, right? So I did a whole generous counter argument, right? The people who are against this is what they say, right? They have solid points, but these are my points. And ultimately, my argument is convincing because, right? So build up a great counter argument, then break it down. Makes your
So
argument.
I'm so excited that you're saying that, because that's an essay structure that I teach on my writing course. I call it the 70-30 plus rebuttal structure. And I've also got YouTube videos on that essay structure. And I actually only recommend it for students that can get at least band 7, because it is a very complex structure to use and to do convincingly. So if you're a level 5 student, it's not the right one for you. But in your case, it's a great one because you're a quick and intelligent writer, and you've already got the English to be getting above band 7, quite a bit above band 7. And so I call that the 70-30 plus rebuttal, where exactly like you said, you create a kind of artificial argument for the opposing view, and then you say why you don't agree with that. Is that right? Is that what you did?
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Brilliant.
Yeah, great technique. Great technique. And lastly, my final tip would be don't forget your grammar, right? There's still, there's an entire band dedicated to grammar, right? So show the examiner you know how to use not just, comma period, comma period, comma period, right? Get a semicolon in there, get a colon in there, get an em dash in there. Use the passive voice appropriately. So really know your grammar, know the uses of the passive voice, and use it at least once appropriately. Use an advanced tense, right? Had been going, right? Had been asking, past perfect progressive, future perfect progressive, present perfect. Try to use those as well. Advanced sentences. So use a mix. I had a can I tell this story about a student very quickly? I had taught a student how to use compound complex sentences, and he got it. Okay, he did well. They were correct. So he thought that by using compound complex sentences, I would impress the examiner. So almost every sentence he wrote became compound complex. So he would have a paragraph made up of 2 sentences, like a legit paragraph, like 5, 6 lines, right? So he thought, why should I use simple sentences? Now I know how to use compound complex sentences. Let me use them, a bit too liberally. So, his writing became unnecessarily dense and convoluted and, just difficult to follow. So don't do what that student did. Okay, don't do that.
And did he get a lower score than he was anticipating?
Yes, he did not do so hot on the IELTS. He did not do so. Then he switched to another standardized test for Australia, but which was easier, truth be told. But
so I imagine one thing the examiner is looking at that stage is it easy to understand what's being said? And if it's not easy to understand what's being said, then that's going to lower your score for task achievement or task response, and also coherence and cohesion.
right.
So even if you think you're doing better grammatically, and you may well be doing better grammatically because you're using a more advanced structure, you're also lowering your task achievement and your coherence and cohesion, because what you're writing is so incredibly dense and very difficult to understand. So it's a bit of a balancing act. I always think the first priority should be communication, and then you should use those advanced structures because they allow you to communicate more complex ideas.
Absolutely.
Which is what you did perfectly, for example, throughout the test, but particularly in part 3.
Right. For the speaking part, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree. The third time I took the exam, I got 999, 8.5 on writing.
Right.
And
Which is
yeah,
still phenomenal, by the way.
thank you. But I did the opposite of what you did, which was I showed that I can use advanced grammar, right? Here is a prepositional phrase acting as an adjective. Here is a prepositional phrase acting as an adverb, So I really went into like teacher mode. Okay. Yeah, I got an 8.5, which is a good score, but I did not get a 9. The second time around, I did what you just said, which is get what you want to say out there. Now, if you have time, go ahead and polish it, combine what you can combine, right? Use a more accurate, more advanced term if if it's appropriate and if you have time, right? But I definitely agree. I mean, the scores reflected that, right? The second time, I didn't focus so much on grammar, got the ideas out, wrote a lot, yeah, my grammar ended up being less advanced, still advanced, but less advanced.
Yeah.
And that made the half-point difference.
Now, if you're writing an essay that's 700 words long, do you have time at the end of writing task 2 and task 1 to check your writing before the end of the exam?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah, please, if any prospective students are listening to this, okay, please leave at least 2 minutes to go back and edit and proofread. Okay. Yeah. Even, people like us who, in Eli's case, it's his native tongue. In my case, it's my first language and I teach it. Okay. Even if you're at this stage, you need to go back and check, right? You may have heard it in your mind, but missed a preposition or missed an article, or simply misspelled, right? Yeah, definitely leave I would say 2 to 4 minutes, depending on how long it is. In my case, I gave myself a good either 4 or 5 minutes to go back and tighten and polish everything that I had written, because it was long. If you've written the normal 250, 270, I think 2 minutes is enough. But
Mm.
do leave that time. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and that's also another point for you doing the computer-based IELTS test, right? Because it's easier to go back and edit, just delete something, add something in. It's not the same as if you've written by pen or pencil.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Not to talk about, the handwriting issue you may have written. My handwriting isn't great, for instance, especially if I'm writing under pressure, right? Time pressure, I mean. So, yeah, that's why I always tell students, just go for the computer one. You can change, you can edit, you don't have to worry about handwriting, all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you also got band 9 for reading. Do you think you could explain some of your tips, some of your methodology, some of your preparation, even for the reading test?
In my case, this is going to sound, I don't know how this is going to sound, but in my case, no, I finished with, I think, 25 minutes to spare. So I did it in almost half the time. Which is a good sign for students, okay? Because also many of my students who are not teachers, right, whose English is not their first language, many of them tell me, I finished with 5 minutes to spare or 10 minutes to spare, which is nice. I mean, it's comforting. That's what I mean. There are no, for me at least, I did not prepare. It was just, I read naturally. I've expanded my vocab meticulously, right? Um, I look up every word I don't understand. I write it in the margins. So I've done my homework prior to the exam, right?
You've been
Uh,
preparing for, 33 years.
right, right. Exactly. Exactly. Okay, but do I have tips? Yeah. I mean, for the chunks of paragraphs, I always tell my students, call it what you will, call it a summary, call it a heading, call it a title, you name it. But you should be able to, with practice, say three things. Whom or what are we talking about, right? So whom or what is this paragraph about? What aspect, right? And why? Why did the author write this, right? Is it to anticipate a counter argument, explain, right? Whatever, illustrate, give an example. You must be aware of, the role this paragraph is playing in that large chain of text, right? And ideally, you should not exceed 7 words. Ideally, you should not exceed 7 words. So just write, okay, this is about so and so. If you're taking the computer one, they still give you, 3 pieces of paper that have your username and password to go from section to section. So you can use those as, to write summaries on. I think this is very important. It protects you from, it protects your mind from wandering, right? All of us have right. All of us have been through this, where you read a page and you stop and you go, whoa, 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 whoa. The symbols, the letters were exchanged, but the meaning wasn't, right? So you don't want that on the exam.
Mm,
So stopping after every paragraph protects you from this brain fart moment, right? Where your mind wanders and you have no idea what you're talking about. So if you don't understand, you can cut it short, right? You can cut it, at the root and know, okay, well, I didn't understand this paragraph. I can't go on because I didn't understand.
mm. So what was your
So,
structure then? Would you glance at the questions and then immediately turn to the passage, read through the passage, I presume quite quickly, but also paying attention to those three things? You mentioned the who, the purpose, and what was the other one?
so whom or what are we talking about? What
Yeah,
aspect and why? The
and why?
significance.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so would you do that and then go and start answering the questions individually? Or what was your structure for the reading?
Personally, I don't do that. I just, again, because I actually don't read that quickly. I read it. at my normal pace, and I still had all that time. So that's why I tell if I can do it with half an hour remaining, you can do it with 20 minutes remaining or 15 minutes
Mhm.
remaining, right? I don't read at double your speed. So I personally don't stop and summarize each and every paragraph. It's something
Right.
I, tell you know, ask my students to do. I just read at my normal pace, right? I soak everything in. I don't read the answers before I read the
The
text. No.
questions.
Yeah, sorry, I don't read the questions. I apologize. I don't read the questions before I read the text.
Right.
Okay, read the text, give it its due. I know a lot of teachers say, just read the intro and conclusion, and then just read the first and last sentence of every paragraph, and you should be fine. I'm not a fan of that technique, right? Um, Especially for the IELTS, where again they are generous with the time that they give you to read. The SAT is a bit different, right? Or it was, at least, before they changed it. But for the IELTS, you have time. There's no need to rush, right?
Mm.
So use that. Read the text, make sure you know what's going on, and then answer the questions.
Mm. So, Roy, you got band 9 in IELTS listening. How did you do that?
How did I do that? Again, natural exposure through my daily life, right? So through my daily life, I've exposed or have been exposed to a different accent. So this is what I tell my students who English is not their thing, right? Listen to things you're interested in, podcasts, YouTube videos, whatever, and try to get exposed to as many different accents as possible. Prioritizing the British accent, more specifically, the neutral English accent, which is the southern part of the country, right? At the end of the day, this is an exam done by British people. So naturally, they're biased toward their own culture. So most of what you're going to hear is going to be in a standardized English accent. That having been said, they're probably going to pepper it with North American accents. So make sure you're familiar with a standard American Canadian accent. And very occasionally, you'll hear an Irish accent or a New Zealand accent or Australian accent,
Mm.
making its way in. So prioritize. So I would say 70% of what you listen to prepare should be, UK. 20% should be North American, 10% should be Oceanic, so New Zealand and Australia, right? Get used to the accent. You don't want to go to the exam and go like, what the heck? I've never heard someone say vitamin before. Well, you know,
It's
get
out
used to
there.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes, one thing I recommend to students is by doing a lot of the listening tests from the Cambridge IELTS practice test book, they'll end up hearing some of those same actors in their real exam. And so, not only have they got used to that particular accent, they've actually got used to that particular accent. It's that exact speaker that's now doing the reading for their actual exam. And so that's very useful.
Absolutely. That was something I didn't. Yeah, it was not on my radar. So thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah.
Okay.
So you're listening to the specific idiosyncrasies of that specific accent from a specific person.
Yeah,
That
exactly from
makes
that
sense.
specific person.
Right.
Yeah.
That,
So, so what tips would you give to people, kind of like a more holistically,
right.
for preparing for the IELTS exam, whether it's kind of lifestyle choices, preparation time periods, or or even just managing stress?
Okay. I would say, yeah, for managing stress, I mean, be disciplined and be reasonable. Don't put unreasonable expectations on yourself. A lot of, I have A2, B1 students who come up to me and they're like, "Yeah, my dad said I can do this in 3 months," and I'm like, "No, you can't."
Mm,
Okay, so yeah, be willing to listen to people who know what it is they're talking about, right? If they tell you you need 1,000 hours, you need 1,000 hours, right? Don't take it that, oh, they just want to make money. That's why they're telling me 1,000 hours. And most of those 300 hours or whatever they are, right? Depending on where you are in the band, they will be on your own, right? They'll be you doing exercises on your own, or you reading on your own, you listening on your own, right? So a lot, in my experience at least, a lot of people have unreasonable timeframes that I can do this in a month or 2 or 3, when in fact their English is too weak for them to actually do that, right?
mm.
So be reasonable. Be reasonable. Give yourself some nice, good breathing room. The second thing is, for writing and speaking, don't do it So don't do the speaking with just anyone, and with writing, don't show it to just anyone. Okay.
Mm.
If you can't afford a teacher, at the very least, try to give it to someone who's at least one level ahead of you. So let them be B2 if you're B1, or C1 if you're B2, and so on. Right. Otherwise, you may not be doing yourself a favor. Right. They may tell you, yeah, this is great. Common mistakes are things like people has. I don't know why many students, non-native students, they think of people as singular, right?
Mm.
So if there's someone's on the same level and they didn't detect that, for instance, right, it might solidify that, and you may not feel a need to change it. So you
Mm.
have to be very careful when you're studying alone with speaking and writing. Usually, you will need a professional. For
Mm.
reading and listening, you can get away with just the general tips and strategies, and the rest you can really do on your own if you're disciplined enough, right? If you're disciplined enough, listen to stuff, right? Make sure what you're listening to is by native speakers. So don't go, listening to makeup videos by a Russian speaker who's speaking English, right? You may end up mispronouncing things, or worse, right? You may make syntactical errors because she or he, whatever, says something so many times, it starts to sound normal to you, right?
Mm.
So make sure you're choosing native speakers for your podcast, YouTube, etc. Right?
Yeah, I
Reading.
totally agree with that. I mean, I lived in Spain for many years, and I realized that when I left Spain, um, do an error no longer sounded that bad to me, or do a mistake instead of
Right.
make a
Make,
mistake. And I thought, oh
uh,
my goodness, it's because I've heard that mistake made so many times that now, like, do a mistake almost sounds like it could be correct. And it was only after really I like had to kind of recalibrate myself to
right.
identify, okay, when we say make a mistake, not do a mistake, that's fine. But that's a direct interference from Spanish.
Absolutely.
And one
Absolutely.
other thing I'd like to comment on is how important what you said about showing your essays and doing your speaking practice with professionals is. Imagine if you'd taken your 697 word essay to someone that wasn't experienced and believed this myth that you shouldn't go beyond 270 words or 275 words. They would have probably given you a low score and deterred you away from writing such a large essay. And you might have come away with a band 7, a band 7.5, maybe even a band 8, and you feel happy potentially with that. But by really pushing yourself and writing such a comprehensive, long essay with expanded ideas, you've got band 9. So that shows how important it is that you really need to be in the right hands.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Absolutely. Especially for writing and speaking. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I mean, this is where one shouldn't skip, right? You shouldn't try to be a cheapskate when it comes to these things, writing and speaking. You need someone qualified to give you feedback. Otherwise, it's very hard to improve on your own. Very hard.
Now, if students want to get in contact with you, for example, for writing, for speaking, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Um, Email, I would say. Email would be the best way. I check my email every day.
Right.
So yeah,
So I'll put that in the description below this video then.
very nice of you. Thank you so much. Thank you
Great.
so much.
Um, thank you very much for coming on. This was a hugely impressive speaking test, and it's been such a delight to discuss, all aspects of the IELTS exam. A big thank you to you, Roy.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for having me. And second of all, I cannot tell you how much I enjoyed this.
All right.
Truly, it was a true, genuine pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.